I've never done a straight-up, down-home review of a recently released video game on this channel. First time for everything, I guess. Don't worry, I'm also currently writing another video about something weird that you probably don't care about, but before I get to that, I just gotta talk about my main man, Spider-Man. As I'm sure you can tell if you've seen my other Spider-Man video, I am a fan. I am a big, fucking, stupid, biased fan. So, to just get it out of the way, this game is awesome. 9 out of 10. This is obligatory. I literally am writing this before the game even comes out. Today is the 5th of September, and here it is. Now it's the 9th of September, and I've completed the game. I was right. 9 out of 10. I'm basically Nostradamus. If you want a quick summation of my thoughts without having to sit through all of my embarrassingly specific nitpicks and game design critiques, here goes. The story is the best in any Spider-Man game ever, bar none. The combat is the best in any Spider-Man game ever, bar none. The swinging is good. It's really good. It doesn't bring a whole lot new to the table, but it's a very solid foundation to expand upon in the future. Insomniac has made an extremely entertaining game, and you'll most likely enjoy it regardless of whether or not you're a dedicated fan of the title character. Alright, summaries for lazy viewers notwithstanding, I'll be covering 4 key facets of today's title. The story, the setting, the combat, and the web swinging. We got a lot to talk about here, and I gotta be upfront about this right off the bat. I'm going to spoil the fuck out of this game. I did that summary a few seconds ago because if you haven't played this game, I heavily suggest you stop this video and come back when you're done. But who am I kidding? Anytime I watch a video that says that, I don't give half a fuck and keep watching. So let's just get into this shit.
Story.
Hey, Willie.
You.
Nice jumpsuit. Slimming.
Usually I start these videos out by discussing the gameplay, because as I've said many times, it's the most important part of any video game. But today we're gonna start with the story, mostly because I don't have a lot to critique here. This shit is awesome. The voice acting, top-notch shit. Yuri Lowenthal and his awesome name do a pitch-perfect job of capturing the overwhelming optimism and sincerity of Peter Parker. And for once, a video game Spider-Man is not annoying as all fuck. There's no conversations about Wolverine's Facebook to be found here. The writing as a whole is pretty stellar. It's right up there with God of War as one of the most compelling single-player campaigns I've played in recent memory. The story itself is a mix of a bunch of different comic book and movie arcs. The final battle is basically just the first and second Spider-Man movies combined into one. But by the time the credits roll, Insomniac has fully established its own unique interpretation of this character. A huge part of the joy of the game in general was discovering the little details of Insomniac's universe. Which villains has Peter fought so far? Has he worked at the Bugle yet? What's his life been like across these 7 years of being the hero we know and love? There's a bunch of obligatory collectibles littered around the open world, but for once I actually had an incentive to go find them. They all came with great little nuggets that I could use to piece together this particular Peter puzzle. I'm a little concerned that they won't be able to keep this sense of curiosity moving forward in the franchise because they kind of busted their origin load in this game. Despite the fact that it takes place deep into Spider-Man's career, it still feels early. This game feels like the biggest threat he's faced by far. Speaking of big threats, a huge part of this game is dedicated to building up Spider-Man's first encounter with the Sinister Six, and that's fucking awesome. I'm hearing a lot of people complain that the Sinister Six itself wasn't around for long enough, but shit guys, we have like 8 villains in this game. They can only shove so much shit in there. I thought both of the dual villain boss battles were supremely satisfying, despite the fact that they were mechanically kind of simple, but we'll get to that more when we talk about the combat. The point is, we got to see this universe's Sinister Six, and I loved every single moment I got to spend with these iconic villains. I want to see more of all of them in the sequels. I particularly enjoyed Electro here. A lot of hints as to what's going to become of him later down the line. We'll definitely be seeing pure energy Electro at some point in this franchise. That's gonna be awesome, and probably tragic in some way, because I actually like Electro a lot in this game, despite the fact that he's a major motherfucker. There's a particular moment where Spider-Man makes a Rocky joke during the Vulture and Electro boss, and it flies right over Vulture's head, but a couple minutes later, Electro comes back with this shit.
Spider-Man! I must break you!
You got it! You got my joke!
This one line humanizes Electro more than an entire fucking film! That's something this game does quite well, fully realize its characters. Despite the fact that I still have a few lingering questions about Mr. Negative and what exactly the fuck was going on with Devil's Breath. Okay, wait, I want to talk about that for a second because I want some answers. Was the young Martin Lee being tested on with an early version of Devil's Breath? Because didn't they mention he had some kind of degenerative disorder as well, just like Harry? We know GR27 is the current iteration of Devil's Breath, but what is GR32 on this monitor here? Is that the symbiote we see attached to Harry in the end? So does that mean that everything, Mr. Lee's powers, the plague that strikes New York, Harry's symbiote, are all of these just different botched versions of Devil's Breath? I'm not sure if the cure for cancer is worth it at this point, guys. We got Instagram filter motherfuckers causing the post-apocalypse. I think it's time to cut the brakes on this whole thing. I just hope we don't end up with an Amazing Spider-Man situation where everything leads back to Oscorp. Oscorp did all the villains! But that doesn't sound right, so I'm probably just misunderstanding the whole thing. Somebody please answer my questions!
I am so confused!
But, back to what we were talking about, all the main characters here are great. Peter is, of course, perfect. This journalist version of MJ is great, and their relationship is fucking adorable. Miles is lovable as hell, and May is... Okay, I don't think I'm ready to talk about that one yet. Now, I do kinda have an issue with how Mr. Negative was portrayed here. Well, not how he was portrayed, but how he was treated. He didn't get enough screen time or character development. Heck, as far as I can remember, we didn't even get a true reveal scene that Martin Lee is Mr. Negative. Like, if you look back at the E3 2017 trailer, it looks like that's the moment in the story where Peter finds out that Martin Lee is the villain.
Martin Lee?
In the final game, this is the moment when Peter discovers Martin Lee is evil. Did you catch it? Cause I fucking didn't. Immediately after this scene, we dive right into the classic Peter knows who the villain is, but he can't say anything situation, which requires more build-up than whoop, oh, okay, wait, was that Martin? I wish they'd kept this scene in, or something like it, to really kick up the Mr. Negative plot with a really impactful, inciting incident between Peter and Martin. So we start Mr. Negative's story on kinda shaky footing, but past that initial, weirdly vague moment where Peter discovers his identity, he's a great villain. You really want to beat his terrorist ass to a pulp. But then he gets pushed aside completely to make way for Doc Ock in the final act, and after that he doesn't really even get an ending. He just gets a hearty kick to the face, which I grant you is better than nothing, but still, I wish Mr. Negative had been given a bit more depth. I was really interested to see what he had to offer emotionally as a villain, but he never really evolved past a cardboard evil guy with a tragic past. Mr. Negative and Spider-Man never got a genuinely memorable scene together. So there is a bit of a problem with Mr. Lee, but I can forgive it because I enjoyed Negative for what he was, and his plot allowed Doc Ock and the Sinister Six to take center stage in the last third. The only character I truly take undeniable umbrage with here is Silver Sable, who is just terrible. She's drawn as completely incompetent, and that might have been okay if it was somehow intentional, or if she had a bit of a personality or presence, but none of that's a part of her character, so she's just the worst. I remember there was one scene where she had to transport the only remaining vial of Devil's Breath, and she makes a point of saying, "I will not be responsible for a pandemic." But then 5 seconds later, the vial is stolen from her by a group of masked gangsters, and suddenly she's like, "Shoot at the car with all of your fucking rockets!" And of course, she has to turn good in the end because she sees that Spidey's way is the way of true justice, which feels so fucking tacked on and unearned. She then leaves the city to reflect on this life she chooses, and I would just like her to stay gone, please. It's not worth it to bring her back, but I mean, one of the DLC packs is called this, so that'll be fun, I guess. So now that we're already on the topic of characters other than Spider-Man, let's touch on those Mary Jane and Miles sections. I haven't really looked into how the community is responding to these particular levels, so I'm not sure if they're generally disliked or anything. Seems like the kind of thing that people would be mad about and want to skip through, but I actually really enjoyed these segments. They're designed absurdly well in terms of the way they're put together, how your eye is guided through the level and how characters will, for instance, say something when it's time to move. Little features like these help these sections stand out as polished and refreshing breaks from the standard gameplay, especially if you're invested in the story and characters, which I certainly was. I loved exploring the art gallery or sneaking through Norman's apartment. These moments were surprising and exciting from a story perspective, at least to me. If you would have told me there'd be Mary Jane stealth segments in this new Spider-Man game before release, I probably would have set my pre-order on fire, and then set you on fire, because that sounds like it would be fucking terrible. But somehow, Insomniac made these missions fun. Now, moving forward, I do hope these missions evolve into something more complicated. While they're very cinematic and make you feel like you're right in the thick of these situations, they're also very restrictive. You're railroaded down extremely specific paths. It's just that these paths are really well hidden by great design work. In the sequel, I'd like to see these missions become more dynamic and choice-driven, playing out almost like mini Dishonored levels as Mary Jane becomes more competent and badass as Peter's new partner. She should definitely get her own gadget wheel, and if stealth is going to be refined anywhere in the game, it should probably happen here first, because these are entirely stealth-driven. Give me multiple paths to take combined with a slightly slightly larger arsenal of interesting sleuthy spider gadgets, and I'll be 100% satisfied. Also, I'm sure Insomniac is already planning something like this, but playing a few missions from the perspective of Harry Osborn in the sequel as he's being taken over by the symbiote would be fucking incredible. You could turn these into some Silent Hill-ass horror levels that revolve around Harry losing his mind and succumbing to the symbiote as he evolves into Venom over the course of the next game. Because I think we all know he's not gonna immediately start out as Venom. There's gotta be some byplay with Peter first. That relationship needs to be built up so we feel for Harry as he devolves into an uncontrollably bloodthirsty monster. Make it happen, Insomniac. Basically what I'm getting at here is I want to play as Venom in the next game and run around the city living out my sick murder fantasy of a modern prototype game. Now, one last thing I want to touch on, and it'll be more bitch about than touch on, but shit, man. Did you guys really have to kill Aunt May? Was that shit really necessary? The arc of Peter losing his mentor and then becoming the mentor was already completed with Otto's betrayal. Was it really all that necessary for his character development to kill Aunt May on top of that? Cut the guy a fucking break, please! Too late for that now, I guess. God damn, that was fucked up.
Ending.
Of course, the New York City of Spider-Man is gorgeous on the surface. You can tell that in a second. But it's also immersive as hell and packed with minigames to engage in, collectibles to collect, and civilians to high-five. It's a highly detailed recreation. You can swing around and visit all the famous parts of town, from Chelsea to Times Square to Devil's Shelf, which I assume is in Hell's Kitchen, next to Devil's Stovetop and Devil's Spice Cupboard. It's a beautifully realized version of this city, probably the most accurate I've seen in the medium yet. It really is something to behold. The streets feel large enough, the rooftops are densely packed with objects to hop over, so you consistently look like a badass. Really, it's great stuff. Now, despite all that goodness, there is some classic run-of-the-mill open-world bullshit, like towers you have to hack to unlock parts of the city. I thought we were done with towers, guys.
Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy.
Really, that's my one big critique about the world moving forward. I want it to be filled with even more rewarding and engaging minigames and side quests. And it's not really like that's even a critique, because there are interesting side quests to get wrapped up in and wacky little things to do in this game's open world. I just hope there are even more next time around. I hope they get really creative. I can only hope they adopt the Arkham City philosophy, where instead of packing the world with tons and tons of footnotes, they instead fill it with 7 or 8 meaty side quests, focusing on small stories between the hero and a new villain. Give me a 3-mission Mysterio side quest. Give me an optional Sandman boss battle in a construction site. Crazy and unexpected shit like that would make this world even more exciting to live in than it already is. You already have the city built, so just keep everything you have, add more. That's it. You're doing great, guys. One quick thing I do want to hit on before we move to the combat is, how are they going to change NYC in the upcoming games? They're not going to take Spidey out of the city and put him somewhere new. This character is inextricably tied to NYC, so how are they going to avoid just giving us the exact same pre-modeled New York over and over again? Well, first off, they're definitely going to continue packing it with detail. Despite the fact that this shit is already dense as hell, as graphics improve, it will become even more visually dense. Next time around, for instance, this alley will be filled with new props, dumpsters, trash on the ground, etc., to give it even more life. Guarantee it. On top of the improvements to the city that are basically a given, they could pull in Arkham Origins and cake the whole city in snow for a whole new look. It'd be a small change, but it would affect everything. The rooftops, how the civilians are dressed, holiday decorations all around town. It'd be a simple way to spice things up. If you're looking for more concrete changes, well shit, based off that post-credits scene, I think we can safely assume that we're gonna be getting Web of Shadows 2.0 soon. This game already breached Web of Shadows territory by having the whole city descend into chaos by the last third, so they're gonna have to amp that up even more next time. And a city-wide symbiote infection is the way to do it. Giant black tendrils stretching across the skyline, monsters roaming the streets, bulbous monstrosities hooked onto the side of buildings. A symbiote plague would really change the way things look around here, and I think we might be getting it. But what about after that? Not every game can be New York imploding because of yet another citywide crisis. That'd just get ridiculous after a certain point. So if they do go with Symbiote City in the next game, I think they're gonna tone it down with number 3. So without a giant disaster looming on the horizon that immediately and harshly changes the way the city looks, how do we make New York different? Time, my friends. Time passes, and when time passes, new things are built. I could see us easily being 20 or 30 years in the future by the time the third game rolls around, so maybe later in the series we could adopt a little bit of a 2099 look. It doesn't need to be Shattered Dimensions levels of gaudy neon, but adding a bit of a futuristic slant as the franchise moves forward would be really cool. Alright, done with the hypothetical nonsense. Let's get into my favorite part of this game.
Combat.
Hey, more guests! Come in, grab a chair! We're playing charades!
This game's combat is fucking amazing. Spider-Man easily includes one of the most endlessly entertaining combat systems since Shadow of Mordor, which makes sense because they're quite similar. Like Shadow of Mordor and the Arkham series before it, this fighting system is all about getting into a groove, establishing a rhythm. You kick, you uppercut, you jump in the air and web them, you zip back down and clock somebody in their dome. It's all very improvisational, as well as being super responsive, which is always nice. But I'm not here to bust nuts, I'm here to pick nits. So what could be improved here? It's, I got it! The boss battles here are slightly disappointing. Whew. For a second there, I thought I wouldn't have anything to complain about. That was actually really scary for a second. Nah, but really, I don't have much to say here, because this combat system is spectacular. The only place where it does feel a little lackluster is in the boss battles, but even then, it's not that much of an issue. The boss battles are relatively simplistic, sure, but I don't think we really complained about that shit when Arkham Asylum came around, so what's the point? I'm pretty sure Insomniac knows that these boss battles were basic. I mean, how could they not? A large majority of them revolve around simply throwing shit at your enemy until they're ready to get kicked in the face. I think that was probably intentional. They wanted to keep the game accessible and didn't want to go all out in every single way this first time around. You gotta save something for the sequels. We all know these could use a step up, and I really have no doubts that Insomniac will kick that shit up a notch next time around. Now, where the combat really excels is outside of boss fights, when you're up against a large group of foes. This game has just enough moves to keep fights constantly interesting. Even 25 hours in, I'm still finding new ways to put motherfuckers in a coffin. Pulling enemies off a roof and then hopping over them is my current favorite. You can basically do that shit on an endless loop. Never gets old. Something I am a little concerned about in the future is the franchise developing Arkham Knight syndrome, which is when your controller just doesn't have enough goddamn buttons. That game's control scheme truly is ridiculous. Like, Jesus Christ, look at how many buttons are on this thing. If fucking 15 individual inputs isn't enough for your combat system, maybe it's time to scale it back. Maybe that's too obtuse to be fun anymore. Currently, Spider-Man has just enough moves in his arsenal to keep things consistently clear. You always know what's gonna happen when you hit a button. There's no crazy double tap moves or weird multi-button input combos. Well, that's not entirely true. There are certain moves that require 2 inputs in this game, but it's simple stuff. It's easy to understand after you've spent some time with the game, and I hope that the combat stays this focused and tight in the sequels. Now, in terms of new additions to the combat system, I don't know. I think I might just leave that one up to Insomniac. They clearly know what the fuck they're doing. I'm just kidding, of course I have more bullshit ideas to talk about. Maybe we could start integrating multi-enemy takedowns into combat, similar to that licensed Wolverine game from like 15 years ago. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows X2 Wolverine's Revenge, don't they? Mark Hamill played Wolverine! Maybe I'll make a video about that shit. By the end of this game, you're already taking multiple enemies out within a couple seconds with that final double takedown upgrade, so why not create a new unlockable move that does the work for you and takes down 2 enemies at once when they're clustered close together? It would result in some seriously fucking cool takedown animations, I know that much. Alongside multi-enemy takedowns, I think we should definitely unlock heavy enemy takedowns at some point in the next game. I kept thinking I was going to be able to one-shot these dudes by the end of the game, but it never happened. Heavy takedowns could be a late game upgrade in the sequel, and they could also come with the added caveat of requiring 2 focus bars instead of 1, so you'd have to quickly decide if you want to use your 2 focus bars on a heavy, or if you want to use those bars to clear out 2 normal enemies instead. But, besides that, I don't have much else to say on the matter, because like I said earlier, I fucking love this combat system. It really doesn't need all that much improvement. It's heavily refined already. All we really need are some more awesome combat animations, some new takedowns, and a few more gadgets. Ah, shit, gadgets. That's something to talk about. Now, before we discuss the gadgets themselves, I just have to say, the gadget quick select menu does not respond fast enough. Yes, this is a severely tiny nitpick, but pressing L1 should immediately open the gadget menu with 0 delay, and instead it takes about a half a second to open, which took some getting used to. Yes, half a second sounds like nothing, but in the midst of a giant combat encounter, half a second means a lot. I'm more with it now than I was at the beginning of the game, but I still feel like it needs to be faster. In a world where Metal Gear Solid 5 exists, having menus that function without the quickness is inexcusable. Look at how fucking responsive and lightning fast these menus are. It's like somebody lubed up my D-pad. Which sounds Just about as sexual as I intended, honestly. I know for certain something was getting looped up while I played that game. I'm reasonably sure this gadget button delay is here because you can also double tap L1 to switch between your two most recent gadgets. But why didn't they just use the D-pad as quick select buttons for gadgets? These buttons on Spider-Man's control scheme are completely empty. Why not use them to make selecting gadgets more intuitive by assigning favorites to a tap and a double tap on the left and right D-pad? If you assign gadgets to the D-pad, that's 4 gadgets within immediate reach instead of 2, and it also allows the gadget wheel to function without needing a delay, because now you're switching through your gadgets with the D-pad instead of an L1 tap. In terms of the gadgets themselves, I think the 8 pieces of tech we're given in this game are great. They're varied enough to add a whole secondary layer to combat that I actually often forgot about, because the fisticuffs themselves are already so fun. That being said, I think there need to be more stealth-based gadgets, because stealth is definitely the facet of this game that needs the most improvement. Case in point, yeah. This needs some fixing, I'll say that much. 2 stealth gadget ideas I have right off the bat that are actually already in the game: invisibility and a drone. The controls and camera of this game can get a little finicky when engaging in stealth, so it would just be really nice to be able to instantly disappear for a second when I inevitably tumble in front of an enemy like a dumbass. Plus, it would just be fun to be able to run in front of an enemy and then disappear to completely fuck his mind. Being able to use the spider drone during stealth would also be great. It would make climbing ceilings a little less of a clusterfuck because it's in first person, and it could be used for a million different things. From tasing out of range enemies to sneaking through small grates to activating electrical panels that Spider-Man can't reach. Give us the drone, Insomniac. If motherfucking Neil Breen can get a drone, Spider-Man deserves one too. That having been said, new gadgets for stealth gameplay would be totally pointless if the most basic elements of stealth gameplay aren't adjusted. As it stands, playing stealthily is pretty pointless in this game. You can't take out bases stealthily, like the game will not allow it. You always have to clear these spaces out by taking down waves of enemies, regardless of whether or not you initially clear the first wave of guys using stealth. This is dumb and should change. Stealth would immediately become more rewarding if you could actually complete these bases without being detected. Maybe if you're taking out a base stealthily, it could require 2 waves as opposed to 6. Like a second group comes in to investigate what happened to the first after you take them all out, and they're all way more on edge, so they start actually using their necks to look upwards, and can spot you way quicker than that first wave of dudes. I don't know, fuck it, I'm just spitballing here. Point is, if there is any part of the game that needs an upgrade, it's the stealth segments. And now it's time for our final topic of the day, sure to be the most controversial:
web swinging.
It's finally time to talk about what may very well be the most important part of any free roam Spidey game: the web swinging. First and foremost, I want to say, great job, Insomniac. It's a beautiful swinging system. Time to nitpick! Alright, first off, the music doesn't need to kick in literally every time I swing around. I turned the music off while free roaming after a certain point because it started to make me laugh. Like, not every swing needs to feel like the last 15 seconds of a Spider-Man movie, guys. It doesn't need to be that epic all the time. Sometimes I just want to swing and listen to the ambience of the city without a 50-piece orchestra crescendoing in the background. Nitpick number 2, using R2 to both swing in the air and run on the ground can be a little finicky. Sometimes I want to land on the ground after a swing and immediately start running, but because the swinging is so automated that it doesn't let you touch the ground ever, sometimes I'll start a new swing right before I hit the ground instead of landing and starting to run instead. It seems as if there's an invisible box laid on top of every horizontal surface. If you're under this invisible box and hold R2, you'll run on the ground, and if you're above it, you'll swing. Problem is, you can't see these boxes, so sometimes you'll think you're close enough to the ground to start running, but you'll still be just high enough in the air for that run to actually turn into a swing. It's a little input thing that not many people may have noticed, but it was occasionally irksome. I know L3 is already dedicated to sticking onto the edge of rooftops, but we have 2 D-pad buttons that aren't being used for anything. 2 buttons on the controller that aren't used at all. So I think it'd be absolutely fine to click the left stick to run in parkour while exclusively dedicating R2 to web swinging. Equip sticking to an edge of a building to either the left or right D-pad, move running to L3, problem solved. I'm sure Insomniac dedicated R2 to multiple actions because they wanted to keep it tight to make it the one main traversal button. But I think we need a little bit more manual control in this system, which is something I'm gonna keep bringing up like a fucking broken record. Nitpick numero 3. The lowest point of a swing just doesn't feel fast enough, at least at the beginning of the game. By the time you unlock all of the swing upgrades, the speed is fine, but it just didn't feel right for like half the game. It's obvious that Insomniac was going for a more realistic sense of movement in this one as compared to previous free roam Spidey games, but still, the lowest point feels like the slowest point sometimes, and it's weird. I just think swinging needs to be sped up a little bit in general, just a little bit though. It doesn't need to get to Web of Shadows levels of insanity, because doing that in a game this visually dense would probably cause the disc to fucking melt. I'm sure they picked this speed because it's just fast enough to allow the open world to load in without too much distracting pop-in while you're flying through it, and I totally understand that, but hopefully now that Insomniac has already modeled a fully realized New York, they can move forward and optimize their world for even faster movement without sacrificing frame rate or graphical quality. I want to swing slightly faster, basically. That's it. Note number 4, I would really like a way to go directly upwards with my webs. Sometimes it felt a little clunky to gain altitude in this game. Effectively, you either have to super run up a wall or aim the camera upwards to find a perch point. Hate to keep bringing up Web of Shadows, but wouldn't it be great if you could do something like this in the PS4 game? In terms of integrating that move into the control scheme, that's easy. Keep the horizontal web dash the way it is, but with the newfound asterisk of you'll web dash horizontally while aiming the left stick. And if you don't aim the left stick when you tap X in the air, if you just leave L3 alone, you'll go upwards instead. That is assuming there's something nearby that you can pull yourself up with. Now sure, an immediate upwards web dash might make combat scenarios a little easier to get out of, and it might feel a little shitty to use indoors if the camera starts bugging out on the ceiling, but I think an easier way to immediately gain altitude without having to charge a jump on the ground should be a part of the next game. I'm sure Insomniac had their reasons for not integrating an upwards web dash into the traversal mechanics, but I think there's a good way to do it, which ties into nitpick number, what are we at now, 7? Sometimes the web zip, web dash, what are we calling this move? It used to be called web dash, I think it's called web zip now, I'm gonna call it web dash. Sometimes the web dash is a little too over enthusiastic for my liking. It has a tendency to shoot me past my destination. Not always, and it is easy to maneuver Spider-Man and change his direction in the air, which is good, but I think I have a solution to this. Tap X in the air for a shorter web dash, hold X in the air for a slightly longer web dash, where Peter pulls himself a little faster and further. This could be applied to the upwards web dash that we just discussed as well. Tap X for a slight boost upwards, better for indoor spaces, and hold X to gain altitude when you're out surfing skyscrapers. Hell, you could turn that into a new skill to add to Spider-Man's arsenal, just call it the extended web dash. Someone should really be paying me for this shit. Nitpick number 9, and this is something I probably should have come out the gate with because it's pretty important, but Spider-Man's whole style of animation when swinging in this game isn't as exaggerated or cartoonish as I would personally prefer. Again, sucking Web of Shadows dick here, but the animation in that game is awesome. It's super expressive and really makes you feel like you're whipping and flipping through New York like a man spider do. These 2018 animations are simply a little bland in comparison to what's come before. Like, what is this? He looks like a fucking dreidel. Am I supposed to think this looks cool? The game's loading screens are constantly filled with poses that are way more dynamic than any of the ones we see during actual in-game swinging. So I think in the sequel, Insomniac could find a better middle ground between the classic stylized as hell swinging and their more grounded, realistic take of just a really athletic guy swinging on ropes around the city. You know what? That's the problem right there. I don't see Spider-Man swinging here. I see a guy doing flips in the gym on YouTube. And Spider-Man is more than just the coolest guy at the open gym on Fridays. He's the coolest guy at the open gym on the fucking planet. That didn't make any goddamn sense at all. Nitpick number 15, and this one actually annoyed me a lot. If you're charging up a jump, that charging jump is always immediately canceled if you parkour over any object. Let me explain why this is annoying at great length, which should be the name of the fucking channel at this point. In order to execute a charge jump, you have to hold R2 and then hold X to charge the jump, and release X to actually do the jump. Problem is, R2 is also the running and parkour button, and this world is so densely packed with objects that will automatically engage a parkour animation that will subsequently cancel your charge jump that it is fucking annoying! You can't just jump from rooftop to rooftop like this is Prototype or Spider-Man 2, because more often than not, Spidey will run into something and automatically cancel your charging jump. Super simple solution to this, just don't have parkour animations cancel a charge jump. I should be able to transfer from a parkour animation immediately into a charge jump animation. Hopefully it would be a very simple simple fix that would make actually using the charge jump a lot more appealing. NITPICK 256, I preferred the old way of boosting out of a web swing. In pretty much every free roam Spidey game post number 2, you would hold X while web swinging to get a boost of speed, and then release it to shoot out at whatever angle you choose. In this game, you simply tap X at any point in the swing to exit it, and while it's simpler, it also lacks the mechanical oomph that came with holding down X to boost and then letting go of the button. Almost as if you are actually the one letting go of the web and shooting into the stratosphere. I hate to sound like an old head. I don't want to come across like, oh, it used to be so much better, like I'm the fucking Eminem of Spider-Man games, but truly, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Boosting into the air and letting go has worked for like 15 years, and just pressing the button isn't as satisfying to me, so bring back that old shit. Now, one final nitpick I'd like to bring up, another biggin', is animation variety. Shadow of Mordor did that shit just right. Monolith knew you'd be pressing that execution button every goddamn chance you got, so they included what felt like 100 different animations for hacking up these poor simpletons. The next Spider-Man game needs that level of variety in its swinging animations. I felt like I'd seen every flip and twist it had to offer less than halfway through the game. One of the many ways to keep web swinging engaging in these games is to include as many varied animations as possible, and I feel like we could use a lot more variation here. So what does this all add up to? What's the big picture here? The big thing across all these little features I've talked about over the past few minutes is that I believe Insomniac's web swinging system is just a bit too automated. Now, there's nothing wrong with the game course-correcting you every once in a while in order to keep the game from looking really stupid. That's what constantly happened in Web of Shadows. You would run head-on into walls, or the game would just generally freak the fuck out. I like the automatic transitions to wall running. I love the trebuchet move where you shoot yourself over the top corner of a building. There's a lot of great stuff in here. But I feel like there's also a lot of room to add more player agency to the system, allowing players to feel more in control as they whip through the streets and back alleys of the Big Apple. I believe a good degree of this manual control could be established with the changes I've listed off today, but there is one other option I'd like to present as an alternative to simply adding and adjusting the system we already have. This idea? An advanced swinging option in the gameplay menu. Spider-Man 2 did this right at the beginning, and plenty of other games have done something like this. The Skate series is another good example. You could present the players with two modes of traversal, simple and advanced. If the player selected the simple option, web swinging would function much like it does in the game right now, possibly with a few new additions that I've talked about, but if the player selected advanced swinging, certain features would be twisted to make web swinging more challenging and layered. 3 changes I can think of right off the bat, here we go. Fall damage. If a player falls from the tallest skyscraper in the game without shooting a web, they will die. A lack of course correction. If the player touches the ground while swinging, they'll land on the ground and the swing will end, as opposed to the game keeping you from touching the ground to always automatically maintain your momentum. No auto release. If you hold onto a web long enough while moving quickly, Spidey will automatically jump at the peak of the swing. With advanced swinging, that wouldn't happen. The player would always have to be the one to decide when the swing ends. So that's 3 little changes Insomniac could make right there if they did in fact decide to go with 2 different modes of movement. That being said, I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're just going to focus on improving the system they already have while trying to appeal to both the people who like the current system and the people who want a bit more to play with. And that's it. That's pretty much my whole list of tiny flaws and possible new features that I picked out of the system like a starving vulture. Here they are on the screen. Now I want you to sit there, read it, and tell me in the comments, honestly, if you think these changes would make the swinging system better or worse. I want to know if I'm going in the right direction on this. I want to hear from other Spidey fans out there. What do you think of Insomniac's web swinging? Is it too automated? Is it perfect? What would you change, if anything? How would you rate your service today? Were you served promptly? Was your server pleasant to be around? And were there any issues with your meal?
In conclusion,
I've spent a lot of time today giving this game shit, so before I finish up, I feel like it's important for me to state, very clearly, that Insomniac's Spider-Man is the best Spider-Man game ever made. There are flaws here and there, but they amount up to the tiniest of blemishes on the face of an otherwise gorgeous fucking game. That being said, just because you love something doesn't mean you can't critique it, and I hope some of the stuff I've brought up today helps clarify where I feel the franchise should go in future entries. It's all very subjective stuff, but either way, I hope you enjoy the video. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta get back to completing some leftover side quests. I still have yet to unlock naked high as fuck Spider-Man. Yeah, I should probably end on a joke. What could I call this suit? PC Peter Parker? Yeah, that's fine.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.